There are certain vehicles in the automotive landscape that just don't need a whole lot of introduction. They're kind of the cult classics, the icons of the automotive scene, if you will. The Ford Bronco, the Jeep Wrangler, the Chevy Corvette, the Mustang, those sorts of cars. And I would say the Volkswagen GTI is also one of them. This year, 2023, marks 40 years of Volkswagen's hot hatchback here in the United States. And of course, that means we get to talk all about it. This is Out Motorsports, the channel for cars, as you are. My name is Jake, and this is a 2023 Volkswagen GTI Autobahn with a 6-speed manual in a real paint color King's Red. Let's talk all about what this car is, talk about what Volkswagen did for 2022 when they redesigned this car and made the Mk8 that you see here, and talk about what you get for the Autobahn trim level, and then of course we'll get it out on the road and talk all about how it is behind the wheel. So what did Volkswagen do when they changed this car up for 2022? Well, this is the Mk8. This replaced, of course, the Mark 7.5, which to me, honestly, was like formulaically the perfect GTI and the perfect hot hatch. Now, in years past, you could get the Volkswagen Golf as just the iconic Volkswagen hatchback with some sort of smaller, slower engine and less performance-y stuff, but Americans don't like hatchbacks because we're weird. So Volkswagen has kind of ceded that. They gave up the regular Golf, and now we only get the GTI, and if you want a little more power and all-wheel drive, we do still get the Golf R. Now, I reviewed the Golf R last year when the Mk8 chassis first debuted. I will link to that video right up here, but this is the one that's a little more attainable, it's a little more every person, and I think it's actually more fun. So we'll get into that in the driving portion, but the GTI is going to remain front-wheel drive for the Mk8. It is a standard 2-liter Turbo 4, as Volkswagen kind of is doing and has done for quite some time. 241 horsepower, 273 pound-feet of torque, and that is paired to either a dual-clutch automated manual transmission they call DSG, or in this case, a real 6-speed manual transmission. The list of manual transmission cars on sale brand new is shrinking year over year, and I'm really happy that Volkswagen offers it not only on the Golf R, but also here on the GTI. And thankfully, they don't only offer the manual on certain trim levels. Whether you get the most basic GTI or this top trim Autobahn, you can have either transmission choice, and really the price difference between the two is not that big. So that is really, really cool. Now, I mentioned this one is the Autobahn. This is going to be that fully loaded model. That gets you a few things that you don't get on the lower trims like the S or the SE. Notably, visually, you're going to see 19-inch wheels here. Functionally, those are paired to Goodyear Eagle F1 summer tires, whereas every other GTI trim gets all seasons. That's kind of one of two big performance differences here. The other thing is the suspension. They pulled the adaptive dampers, the DCC, off of the Golf R. So whereas other GTIs will have a fixed rate suspension, these Autobahn models will have those adaptive shocks. Every GTI does get the magic differential, is what I've been calling it lately. It's an electronically controlled limited slip diff on the front axle, of course, because they're only front wheel drive, and that does a lot. It goes a really long way in pulling this thing out of corners. They added that on the Mark 7s and 7.5s, and they kind of trickled it down from being an option on certain models to coming on all of them. And then interior-wise with the Autobahn, normally you would only find black leather seats, but in the case of the 2023, this girl is a COVID car. So this one still has the plaid cloth seats. They are indeed heated, but they are not those black leather seats because Volkswagen, as with many brands, is still pulling themselves out of a little bit of a parts shortage. So in this case, the Autobahns have the Harman Kardon sound system, but they lose the black leather seats. However, a friend of mine, one of our followers, bought an SE, which is supposed to come with Harman Kardon sound, and his didn't come with HK. So Volkswagen's kind of doing what they can to make sure everyone gets what they want for the most part, but this one in particular does not have those leather seats. By the time you watch this video, everything might have changed, so don't take my word for it, but this exact car doesn't have leather. Now, as far as other interior things that we should talk about, this does have the standard Mk8 interior, which is all touch controls except for the window switches and the mirrors. Those are still real buttons on the door, but you're going to have a digital cluster in front of you. You're going to have a 10-inch infotainment screen with all touch controls that are indeed not backlit and easy to touch otherwise, and you're going to have a touch-controlled sunroof, which is open right now, and it only took me 17 tries to get it that way. So we'll talk a little bit more about how that all gels or doesn't in the driving portion, but the interior in this car is standard across the board no matter what trim level you get. They kind of simplified everything there, so there are no real options to be had as far as the tech in that regard is concerned. This car also does have the Volkswagen IQ Drive driver assistance suite, which has a pretty good version of lane keep assist, lane centering, radar cruise, all that stuff. It works pretty well, especially considering this has a manual transmission. We've seen other cars, especially the Subaru WRX, comes with a manual transmission. You lose a lot of the driver assistance stuff. They only pair that with their 2-pedal option. Volkswagen, I really appreciate, lets you have all of this, whether you have the DSG or the manual. Now, speaking of competitors, we should talk about where this sits in the kind of affordable enthusiast car realm, because we're losing a lot of that market in general. You know, all the options are pretty good, but we don't have a ton of them where we used to have some more. So this is one of very few, if not really the only, true hatchback design, being like a real squared off hatch. You do still have the Acura Integra, which is more of a lift back, but the seats go down. It's a big hatchy rear. You can put a lot of stuff in it. You've got the Civic Si, you've got the Subaru WRX. If you're okay with a two-door, you can get a Miata or a BRZ or a Toyota 86. But as far as affordable fun, that's not like the muscle car segment of the world, like the Challengers and the Mustangs and the Camaros, there's few options. This one, being an Autobahn, is priced fairly high, I think. This is $40,000, more or less. This particular car, like I said, COVID car, leather seats pulled out. They give you a $1,200 credit for that, so it scoots in at like 38. But either way, 38 to 40 for this, I think, is a lot of money. A fully loaded Integra comes in at like 35. The Subaru, the Elantra N, I didn't say the Elantra N earlier. Hyundai Elantra N, great car. WRX, Elantra N, Civic Si, Integra, they're all less expensive. $40,000 is a lot of money. Now, you don't have to buy an Autobahn. You can buy an SE for a good bit less. Those come in at like 34, 35 from my limited memory. And we'll talk about this in the drive portion, but while I do think it's nice to have some of the things you get with the Autobahn, namely the adaptive suspension, I don't think any of it's necessarily a deal breaker, and I think the SE is probably where you're going to find a much better value if you must have the hatchback, if you are a diehard Volkswagen fan, if you loved your Mark 7, 7.5 and want the Mark 8 because of whatever reason. I think the SE is going to be that better price point and better value. But if you really, really want these wheels, these tires, this suspension, etc., this is where it's going to come in price-wise. So, alrighty, let's talk about driving the 2023 GTI with a 6-speed manual. So the first thing I want to talk about is the transmission, because DSG has been really good for a long time, and it is really good. And I think the DSG is the best transmission if you want to go the quickest, which I think about a lot of modern 2-pedal options. However, where I didn't like the manual as much in the Mark 7 and 7.5 GTIs, I like this one actually a good bit. I think it's nice and appropriately notchy. It's got the right amount of throw. It's a good manual. It's not just like manual cosplay, which I think a lot of manual cars can be. That's always the risk with a modern manual, because cars have just kind of evolved. And I think this pairs nicely to the engine. Before we talk about the engine though, the clutch pedal that you do get to deal with is a nice clutch. It's not too heavy, not too light. It is very Goldilocks-y, and it's easy in traffic. I drove this car through Washington, DC traffic on a Friday afternoon. Super fun. It actually wasn't that bad. And then of course on back roads here, it's also easy. The car is very easy to get some nice heel-toe downshifts with. The pedals are nicely spaced for it if you're good at that. And if you're not, you can still just rev match, and it's, you know, pretty easy to do that as well. So I really like having this as a manual. You know, the DSG is technically better, but this is a good manual. As far as the engine it is paired to, you know, varying on the same thing, 2-liter turbo 4. It's been very good for a long time. I think it makes plenty of power and torque. I like how it's all delivered. You do have to get it wound up a little bit, which has kind of been this way for a while, to make it feel like it's got some power built. You know, the turbo is not making all of the power and torque right off idle. You just need a little bit more revs than that to make it feel fun and frisky. But it does feel appropriately fun and frisky when you need it to be. And the chassis is frisky and fun too. I don't know if you could tell there. It rotated so nicely through that turn. It was wonderful. This is a good chassis. I really liked the Mark 7.5 GTI. I really thought the Mark 8 Golf R that I drove was a little too kind of heavy and leaden. I don't like the Golf R for how it drives as much as this. It's not as playful, and I love playful. The Golf R is a little more serious. It's a little more like we will have traction everywhere. This is not that, and I like that. This does have that, I call it the magic diff. It's a limited slip differential on the front axle, and it does a very good job putting power down as you exit a corner. And there's just no real concern about torque steer or understeer. You can really drive this thing like a little bit of a lunatic, and it does a really nice job. And that is paired to adaptive suspension on the Autobahn trim that I'm driving. That is something normally reserved for the Golf R, but they pulled it into the GTI. And the suspension gets a little stiffer, a little softer based on comfort or sport mode. And then there is a custom mode that gives you like several more degrees of ratchets or clicks, if you will, for the suspension, for how stiff or soft you want it to be. And I think it's really nice that they let you do that, but I think a lot of drivers don't need to bother, because the concern I have is you've got so much adjustability that you're gonna actually make the car a little worse. So I would start out, just try comfort, try sport if you're gonna buy one of these, and then when the time comes that you wanna play, find a good road, mess with the settings, you know, put it in one, do a little drive up and down, see what you like, change it, do the drive again, and just like figure out what you want out of it. Don't just pick a setting and leave it, because that will not be very fruitful. Now, as we're going through these corners, it's nice to just kind of brush the brakes. The car does want to rotate when you add a little trail brake to it, and the brakes are good. The pedal has good initial bite, good feel, and it feels pretty good through the range of the pedal. If you get in the brakes a little heavier, if you're like in traffic and you have to stop, not like a panic stop, but just a heavier braking moment, I wish it had a touch more bite when you get into that. But generally, it feels pretty good, and that's a personal preference thing. The car has plenty of brake on it. It's just the feel once you get into it, I think, is a touch soft for my own preferences. And then with steering, that's the other final thing here. When you change your drive mode, of course, the steering changes its heft. The feel, I think, is pretty decent for what it is, and I think the heft is also pretty nice, and there's pretty good feedback. I know where the wheels are, I know where I'm going. It talks to you enough that it keeps the car feeling playful, it keeps you feeling confident, and it's all balanced. That's what the GTI has always been, is a nice balance of everything. So the Mark 8 Golf R truly didn't leave the best taste in my mouth when I drove that this time last year, and this is leaving a better taste with me. I still think the Mark 7.5 was peak GTI, and I'm going to tell you why. The interior. The interior of the Mark 8 is not what it needs to be for a driver's car. This has this new infotainment system that all of the automotive media have complained about, where everything is touch-based. Your controls for your climate and volume are touch-based and not backlit. Your controls for driver assist and drive mode and climate are touch-based and kind of off in a little pod. Your defrost and headlights are touch-based over here. There's just a lot of touch things. Even to open the sunroof is a swipey slider, not a button. It's just very difficult. I don't like it. I don't see the point. And Volkswagen knows people don't like it. They are bringing back real buttons on the steering wheel, I think for next model year, and they are adding backlighting to the strip of controls down here below the screen. Doesn't mean the strip down below the screen is going to be any less sensitive to accidental touches. It's pretty easy to change the temperature if you're trying to do something on the main infotainment screen, but they're at least trying, and they know that this was kind of a misstep. Is it enough to keep me from buying the car? I don't know. I don't want to say it is, because I don't want to turn you off from like test driving one of these, but just really consider if this is what you want day to day or not for the interior. For me, the more I drive it, the more I get used to it. I still don't like it on principle, because I don't think touch controls are safe on principle. So I really hope VW will do something about it and go back to buttons and knobs, but everyone's trying to get away from that in general for some insane reason. Otherwise, they do have a fully digital gauge cluster in here, which I like a lot. A lot of automakers are going to fully digital clusters, and I think Volkswagen is using theirs well. I don't want to talk to you. Can't even say the brand, it'll just bring up the assistant thingy on the screen. But they are using the screen well, and you've got several different options for gauge displays, but then you also can control how much information is shown. So I've got oil temp and coolant temp up on here. I've got my current song playing on here. I could have a full map in the display like Audi's virtual cockpit. They brought that over from Audi to VW, and that's really nice. If you've got your adaptive cruise control set, you can show some info about that. It's really nice and flexible. I prefer leaving it in a fairly analog setup, but you still get lots of info. So kudos to VW for letting you use the screen nicely and not just re-emulating the same analog gauges, if you will. And then other interior bits worth talking about are the seats and the visibility. The driving position in here is great for someone who's tall. I'm 6'1", and the Germans have always done a nice job with driving position for tall people because Germans and Europeans are generally somewhat tall. And I fit very well. I've got good thigh support on these seats. Seating position is great. The seats themselves are comfortable. I've done several hours of highway to get to these fun roads, and this has all been just lovely. Good bolstering on the sides, good bolstering for your thighs as well, and these are heated, not ventilated, but nice to have that. The visibility out the front is also really nice. The dash is low. The infotainment screen that I don't like dealing with is low and at least out of sight. So on good roads, I'm not craning my neck to see everything. You know, the pillars are fairly thin for a modern car, fairly unobtrusive. You've got little like wing windows down here so you can see as much as you need to, as much as they will let you. Good visibility out the front. Obviously out the back, it's, you know, bigger pillars and all that, but you do have the backup camera to help you there, and it's a nice high quality camera. As we go through some of these downhill bits, this is just a pleasant car to play with. I'm really enjoying it, and I am honestly surprised at how much I'm enjoying it because the Golf R did not leave the best taste in my mouth. I am so much more into this than the Golf R. It is still a little less playful and chuckable and whatever versus a Mark 7.5, but everything has to grow up eventually. This car did not move out to the suburbs wearing a pair of pleated khakis. This car is still like a fun city boy who's just gotten a little older, has a retirement account, like sort of has responsibilities and realizes he should go to bed at a decent hour, not stay up all night, but can go out and have a good time. That's like where this car is right now. And for a lot of people, that's exactly what they need out of a GTI. So I think VW's done a nice job with it. And it is certainly won my heart more than the Golf R did last year. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2023 Volkswagen GTI Autobahn 6-speed manual in King's Red. It is a color. I'm so pumped that it's a color. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe right here on YouTube. Give us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Out Motorsports. If you'd like to join an ever-growing community of LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, head over to outmotorsports.com. We have a whole gaggle of people online who would love to be your new best friends, and we are hosting events all around the United States throughout the rest of 2023 and into 2024, and we'd love to have you for any and all of those. Till next time, please stay safe, be well, see you again soon.